Hello, this is Carrie Fell. Welcome to my studio.
So on the door to my loom room is my wall of warps. And when I finish dyeing up my warps, I hang them on the hook here until I start to weave, and then I go over and I can choose something off of there to work on. Today I'm going to choose one warp that I dyed a long time ago. This is actually 3 warp chains of 15 yards long, and I'm going to combine them into one warp, which will be a Huck lace shawl. Now I just finished weaving some Huck lace, but with a lot finer wool. This is the 4-ply wool that I have in cones that I don't think is available anymore. It's a knitting machine wool, I believe, and it weaves beautifully. It's great, makes for a great warp. So the whole thing is hanging on a hanger all together. The draft is here, the project sheet with the notes on this side telling me what it is, and all the notes from a past project. So all the threads are threaded through the reed and the heddles. I'm doing this one front to back. So I did that last night, and that's what it looks like at the front. With the dyeing, sometimes the yarn gets a little sort of matted. So here's my warp in a basket on the floor. It comes up across my bench and to the reed. Now this is what I was talking about, where the warp chains being a little bit matted and stuck to themselves. So they, like, who needs chokes when you got everything holding to itself like that? But with the stripes going through the reed, everything needs to separate out. I use my fingers first to, I don't have 2 hands here, but I use my fingers to sort of comb it back to here, and then use the reed. Of course. Also, I wind my warp 2 by 2, so sometimes those 2s wrap around themselves, and that causes the biggest problem. So my warps for sale are wound singly on the warping board, so that they don't have that relationship with their neighbor. There we go. I have 2 shawls already wrapped around the loom here, and this is the 3rd one. The first couple shawls had a blue weft. This is the weft for the first couple, and it's 100% wool. And then this shawl is some Harrisville Shetland, and this is going to tighten up quite a bit when it's wet finished, but I'm kind of loving this. So shawls, wide scarves, whatever you want to call them. I am hoping to get at least 6 off of this warp. There's my back beam. It's a beautiful warp, isn't it? This is weaving up pretty quickly. I'm enjoying it very much. I would like to do 2 shawls in each of 3 different warp yarns. So I haven't figured out my 3rd warp yarn yet. I'm kind of hoping my Knit Picks order comes in so that I can use one of the skeins of palette yarn and dye it up to complement this well. So hopefully that will happen in the next couple days and I'll get to use it. Otherwise, I can search this shelf again and see what I find. I messed behind the loom there. This next shawl is going to be a V-Shawl. So I've started the new one here and hem stitched. I'm going to weave it the same way as I wove the other ones, but after I get to 3 feet or so, I will cut it off and then weave the ends back into the warp again. So right now to weave off a few feet. So I've woven 44 inches. That's wrapped around the beam right now. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut this off. I'm going to leave lots of length in this direction. I have to leave this width plus enough for fringe, so plus another probably 6 inches is what I'll leave. And so the width plus 6 inches. Should I get the measuring tape out? So the width of this piece is just over 15, so let's say 16 inches plus 6 inches for fringe plus some take up. So I'm looking at leaving 24 inches of the warp, cutting it off at the 24-inch mark and setting it aside, and then reattaching the warp and carrying on weaving again in the same pattern. Before I advance it to cut it off, I've put a piece of green painter's tape across the fell line. I did it on the underside so that it's out of the way when I'm weaving the ends back in. But yeah, press the painter's tape in on the underside, and I just fold it over like this to give myself something to grab onto on either side. And then I left a good 8 inches or so of weft on the left side, and I fold that over like that, and that sort of holds that, stops it from being pulling up. And I make sure it's firmly on. Now I'll advance and cut off at the 24-inch mark back there somewhere. Of course, I'll cut it off in front of the reed to preserve the threading. This is something I'm trying for the first time. I measured 24 inches from down here, and that's the line. I decided to put a piece of tape there, and so that's where I'm going to cut. There I cut the first part, and I tied a couple there, so I can't pull the reed forward and accidentally lose all the threading here. So now I feel confident in just cutting the rest. Trying to hold the camera and cut at the same time. There we go. So I understand that there's other ways that you can retie back onto the beam and where you don't need to cut like this, where I could weave, put in the stick, weave some more, fold the sticks over, and then lash the sticks on to the front beam, and that's a good way of doing it. My issue is I don't have proper size sticks. I've tried it with sticks that I have kicking around here, and it made for big, awkward, bulky things. I need to get myself some slim little sticks that'll work well with. So in the meantime, I will tie these in to bundles and lash them on to the apron rod, which is now rolled up. So, but I'll take all these off. So we've got some full, well, let's take a look. Take the break off first. So all this loose warp here is what will be woven back into the next piece. But in the meantime, I will take this off. And there's a couple more. There's 3 completed shawls on here. Everyone likes a good unrolling, right? And there's the blue. Okay, I'm getting a big pile here. Okay, here's a look at what's come off the loom. We have a pile here in the hallway that is 3 complete straight shawls that were first first woven. And then I decided to make this V-Shawl. So that's what we have here. So it's a little shorter because it's in 2 parts. So I'm going to separate it here, and I'm going to put it aside, and then I'm going to weave another piece this same length, and then we're going to take this piece and weave these ends into the piece that's on the loom. I'm lashed on. That was really quick. And now I'll just release the tension and then crank on. And it's a good even tension all the way across. Ready for the next one. So I've woven the next part off. It's wrapped around the front beam here. I have 12 repeats of this Huck lace area, so that I know it's the same length as the one I previously wove. And I left the weft hanging off on the right side, and this will be part of the fringe at the V. So now I'll get that first part and start weaving it in. Okay, so I finished weaving the ends back into itself, and that's the final edge there. Now it looks like it's pulled kind of funny, and we've got, you know, not a straight edge there. But I'm not worried at all about that, because this is under a lot of tension. So once the tension is released, this will bounce back and it'll be nice and relaxed and even across there. So that's not a problem at all. Now, I don't really want to cut it off at this point in order to do the fringe on this edge. The fringe is done on this side, and this will also be cut, and the fringe is twisted right here. This is the point at the front of the V. I don't want to cut it off right now because I still have lots of warp back here on the beam. I have enough warp here for at least one more shawl. I don't think there's quite enough for two. And I could cut it off and then lash on like I did earlier, but I'm not sure that's necessary. So what I'm going to do is just advance this. I'm going to put some tape on, some painter's tape on this edge here, and that will hold these final threads in their spot. And then I think I'm just going to advance and wrap it around the beam down here. And I'll have to be a little careful to make sure that I don't catch the fringe, you know, in underneath the cloth as it wraps around. And on this side, I'll just have to keep this out of the way to make sure it doesn't fold under, you know, this woven part here. But yeah, follow along with me. We'll see if it works. First time I'm trying this where I leave it on. But I think if I'm just mindful of this part here, and when I'm weaving and when I'm advancing, I could probably just lay it on the beam down there and carry on. I'm weaving the next piece, and the jury is still out on whether I should have kept the previous one on the loom. I'm having no problems here. The fringe that I've already twisted is staying nicely out of the way as I start to wind on the next bit. This side I've had to take a string and a shoelace and tie it to the beam. It was not laying nicely here, and all the excess was flopping onto the floor and, you know, wiping itself around, and yeah. So tied onto the beam to keep it under control while I weave this next bit. It's going well. I have enough on the beam to finish at least this next shawl, and then we'll see. There won't probably not enough there for another shawl, but maybe a little cowl, or maybe just a sample piece that I can play with some different treadlings or something. Okay, I'm finished weaving. I already started to cut off, and then I realized maybe I should videotape this. So I wound it around so that the end is down here. Measured 6 inches, which is just even with the beam. So I'm cutting, but it goes sproing. So my first couple cuts, as soon as I held onto the warp while I cut it, and then tied a loose overhand knot here, so that because as I finish this, that bar, the weight of the bar at the back, is going to pull everything down, boom, and pull all the threading out of both the heddles and the reed. I don't want that because I'm going to be tying a new warp onto this one. So having overhand knots here will stop everything from going whomp right through. So now that I've tied those knots there, I can just cut here. And you'll hear it go whomp. Oh, not too badly. So the threads, oh, I did release the tension so that when I cut it, the threads, they sproinged, as you can see, but they didn't sproing so hard that they went right through the reed. Normally, if I'm not holding the phone, I would be holding the warp threads while I'm cutting so that I can ease them back gently. But I have 2 hands, not 3. So, yeah, let me just maybe put the camera on a holder, and then we can unroll it. So I tied the rest of the warp into loops. Don't want to accidentally brush against anything and pull it through. So now the threading is preserved and the spacing in the reed is preserved. and I can tie on another project. This one had to be a little bit shorter. I dyed a skein of wool to use as the weft, and I ended up using the entire thing. So I ran out of weft after 76 inches. So it still makes a decent shawl. We'll see what it's like once it's wet finished. All right, now we are at the V-cowl, and it's tied on back here with a shoelace. So I'm gonna need to untie that. And it's gonna come off with this part. Oh, look at that. Looking lovely. Of course, this is going to need to be twisted, this fringe here. And now this is another shawl. These little bits here is how I mark my length. I measure how far I've woven, and then I just loop a piece of yarn through and write it on my clipboard, the length of that, where that yarn was, and then I just need to measure from that spot as I go along. So I have 2 shawls and the V-Shawl on this one because I cut the previous ones off up here close to my lashing on, and that gives me enough length for a good fringe. I often just measure it right here on the beam. Make sure everything's hanging flat and even. 11 inches, so 5.5. So I often just eyeball it, because when I twist the fringes, that's where I make sure they're all the same length. If I need them to be exactly right, then I'll take it over to the cutting mat and use a rotary cutter to cut a straight line. So I just finished twisting these ends, and I have the V part, and then we have the 2 parts coming off of that here, each with a length. So I'm going to twist the fringes at the end of this next. I can pull off the tape at any point now because everything is secured. These edges are secured with twisting, and these ends are already hem stitched on the loom. But I'm still going to twist the fringes because I like that neat look. So here is the completed V-Shawl, and it's wonderful. I've got it wrapped around the neck. That's one way to wear it. Here it is with the 2 parts hanging down the front. So it has some good length. And I'll just turn it around now. And there's the V hanging down the back, showcasing the beautiful warp as it crosses over itself and produces some amazing color combinations. So this is a nice easy shawl to wear. It will just rest simply like this with the ends hanging, or you can wrap those parts around the front. And you know, you could even wear this in the front if you wanted to. But I think it makes a neat accent. You walk away and people go, whoa, look at the back of that piece. So this is the one that has the purple Harrisville. And so this whole part here has a very purple lean to the color. And then when you get to the back, this purple weft is discontinued as the two warp pieces weave into themselves, and then you get this multicolored panel that changes as the dyed warp changes. So lots of nuances in here. And the back, of course, just creates its own plaid just from the striping and the warp. So that's kind of cool.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and share with others. Also, please consider joining my Patreon. That's where I post the weaving notes for this project and others. I also have bonus videos showing behind the scenes tours of my studio. Thank you for watching!